Hey, so I'm studying for my CompTIA Security 601 exam, and there are better ways to study than others. Um, I find I can focus a lot more when I have something to show for my time a little bit more. So if I share it, I get more than just reading it, and I concentrate better. So with this, there's a lot of obvious words, like things that you would already know that are like common concepts. A lot of this exam is just unifying the language revolving around this. So so here in 1.1, a lot of these you'll know already. But once we get to cryptography, it doesn't make as much sense anymore. So phishing is when you just ask someone for money, usually under false pretenses. Smishing is SMS phishing, so when you get it over a text. Vishing is when you do it over voice. Spam is unwanted messages. Spam over instant messaging is spam over instant messaging. Spear phishing is when you, instead of like sending one email to 1,000 people, you like stalk someone and find out what they want and then use it to make a more carefully designed thing against somebody. It's like when you actually read someone's dating profile. And dumpster diving is when you look in the trash or for things that might not have gotten shredded, or shoulder surfing is when you just look over someone's shoulder, you watch them type their password, you look at whatever they have access to. Farming is, I just looked this up. Farming is more based in code, so it'll send you to a fake website, or it'll make a link not be right. Um, Tailgating is when you follow somebody who has access. So, like when there's an apartment, somebody goes in, somebody follows them, or someone lets them in the apartment. Eliciting information is just when you talk to somebody and get the information. It's whaling is like spearfishing, but specifically for high value targets, like I don't know, Jeff Bezos or whatever. Prepending is not the same as pretexting. Prepending is adding code to the beginning of a presumably safe file. Identity fraud is when you steal someone's personally identifiable information and then use that identifiable information to be that person in the eyes of other people. And invoice scams are when you just send a fake bill to someone. Credential harvesting is when you harvest credentials. Reconnaissance is when you do scan for vulnerabilities. Hoaxes are fake information. Impersonation, I guess it's like identity fraud, but with less work. You just say you're somebody. Uh, no, I guess it's like when you can impersonate a plumber, like in Chip and Dale Rescue Rangers. Watering hole attack is when you know that someone's going to visit a certain website, so you target that website. Typo squatting is like when you buy the domain of a similarly spelled website. So you buy the domain for FCAE book instead of FACE book. Pretexting is not the same as prepending. Prepending is when you add code to the beginning of a file. Pretexting is when you offer a deal. It's when you lie. You offer a deal that's too good to be true, or try to gain sympathy. So as a security manager, your job is to turn off people's emotions. Influence campaigns are when you go on social media and influence an idea or decision. And the reasons these work are authority. You act like you're their boss or whatever. Intimidation, like there is going to be harm. Consensus, like everyone's doing it. Scarcity, like you're not going to have that opportunity. Familiarity. I don't quite understand how that's different from trust. Okay, specifically, if you like someone, you are more likely to do what the person asks. So that is what they mean by familiarity. Trust is a separate concept. Urgency is when you're short on time instead of the actual resource, which is what scarcity is about. So that's 1.1. A lot of that was kind of obvious. Now we're getting more into actual code and whatnot. Things in the actual computer, not just social parts. So we have ransomware. That's when you encrypt something and don't let it go. And then offer to decrypt it if you get money. Ransomware is also like blackmail. Trojans are programs that offer a service but have a malicious intent. Worms are self-replicating virus. A potentially unwanted program is anything that might have a virus in it. So, like, any game file is considered a potentially unwanted program. A fileless virus is a virus that doesn't make its own file. Instead, it uses the language of the operating system so that it can it doesn't create its own file. It just becomes part of the operating system. Command and control. I'm not quite sure how that's different from a bot. I guess command and control is the method, the bot is the result. Crypto malware is any kind of malware that intention is to mine cryptocurrency. So it can be crypto malware and a worm. It can be crypto malware and a Trojan. A logic bomb is a virus that only acts under certain conditions. Like if it's January 1st, it'll go off, or if this password's been entered 10 times, it'll go off, or if this employee gets fired, this virus will go off. Spyware is anything that sees what a computer's doing. Keyloggers are programs that let you find out what's being typed. So that's a good way to find passwords in plain text. Remote access Trojan, I guess, is a form of command and control. A rootkit is anything that attempts to get root access. So it can be a rootkit and a worm. It can be a rootkit and a Trojan. And a backdoor is something in the program that is intentionally there. So if you want to help users get their passwords recovered, or like there's a default PIN you can enter that'll unlock it, that's called a backdoor. Different types of password attacks. These range in different levels of complexity. Spraying is when you just try a couple known common passwords, like 1234. Dictionary is when you use a list of common known passwords. And brute force is when you try every possible password. A rainbow table, now we're getting into the encryption element. So it's easier to explain in context of plain text. So some passwords are just stored as the password. So they have a list of usernames and passwords, and then you can just go to that part of the website and read them as they are. You don't have to try. But a rainbow table is something you use to decrypt their form of encryption, specifically hashes. We'll get into hashes later. Malicious USB cable, that's self-explanatory. A malicious flash drive, these are forms of physical attacks. Card cloning. I think that means credit cards and access cards. So like if you need to access a part of a building, you can just clone that card, I guess. Skimming is when you put something fake on like a pin pad so that you can read their pin numbers and find their credit card numbers and all that. And then tainted training data for machine learning is self-explanatory. You just give it the wrong information. And supply chain attacks are when you attack the supply chain. It's so like you make it so that stuff is delivered to the wrong place, for example. That would be considered a supply chain attack. This is self-explanatory. Cloud-based versus on-premises attacks. A cloud-based attack is an attack based in the cloud. Now, these next couple, the cryptographic attacks, I don't understand that well. I don't know what the difference is between a birthday attack and a collision attack. So a birthday attack is when you guess on the cryptography. And a collision attack is kind of the same thing. So in a collision attack, you are trying to find two inputs that result in the same output. And that's somehow helpful. But a birthday attack is when you just try one thing until it works. But a collision attack, they're similar, but the goal of them is different. And then a downgrade attack is... So a downgrade attack is any kind of attack that makes it convert to a less encrypted design. So, like, let's say version 8.0 has like one less layer of cryptography, and then version 8.5 has the full. So you would want to convert 8.5 to 8.0 just to make it, that is the intention of your cryptography. The attack has that specific goal, but and then you would have different attacks that had different goals after that. So on 1.3, okay, that we probably just went through the hardest concepts of this. Given a scenario, analyze potential indicators associated with application attacks. Privilege escalation is when you manage to get a user account with admin access. Cross-site scripting is different than cross-site request forgery. They're very similar. And by the way, this is so much easier than just trying to do practice tests, because in a practice test, you have to read 3 sentences and then figure out what they're asking you. But this, it's more of a flashcard system. Your goal is to know what this term means. Okay, so cross-site scripting is when you use code. JavaScript in someone's web browser. Cross-site request forgery is when you get the victim to do something. One attacks the computer, one attacks the person, okay? So, injections are when you inject code into a program. So the SQL injection is any place where you can add parentheses and quotations and asterisks and all that. A dynamic link library injection is a technique used for running code within the address space of another process by forcing it to load a dynamic link library. Now, I'm not totally clear on what that means, but I think it's when you get something to open another file. And lightweight directory access protocol is apparently pretty much the same way I described SQL. I guess it's just in a different language. But it's when you add parentheses and asterisks and brackets into a part that the user could normally provide input. I don't know what an XML injection is. Okay, yeah, I don't understand 1.3 at all. This is the hard part. Like, you have to actually understand parts of how computers work to get through 1.3. Yeah, the other 1.4 through 1.8 are super easy. And 1.1 and 1.2 are super easy, but 1.3 is so weird. Alright, I don't quite remember where I was on this, but I just know that we were on 1.3 somewhere. Privilege escalation is when you escalate your privilege. Cross-site scripting is when you perform stuff in the code of the website that shouldn't happen. Cross-site request forgery is a little different. That's when you do stuff with the user to make them do stuff they're not supposed to. Injections are when you input your own code into a website. These are just four different types of database. The structured query language is one kind, the dynamic link library is one kind, the lightweight directory access protocol is one kind, extensible markup language is one kind. The way you mess with them is pretty much the same. Pointer object dereference is when you make something link to the wrong thing. Directory traversal, that's when you go to a directory you're not supposed to. Buffer overflows are a little weird. It's when you make more data be written to a place than it's meant to hold. So you screw with its budget. Race conditions is when you make a program do two things at the same time, and it tries to, I guess it's called a race condition because the two things are racing. And then sometimes that makes it do stuff it's not supposed to. By error handling, they mean that they reveal too much in the error codes. Improper input handling is... it's just when you don't handle the input properly. And that means that you are filtering it by real user input and injections. So if you don't do what they called sanitizing, which is basically, or filtering, or encoding, those are all things. A replay attack is when, say for example, you have like a closed circuit television and then you just make it play the last 10 seconds. You can also like replay someone's password so that you can access that. Integer overflows are really similar to buffer overflows, but it's where you affect the number of bytes that it says that it's allowed to hold. Request forgeries. Either you make the server be wrong or the user do something they're not supposed to. Application programming interface attacks is when you attack using the interface programming. Resource exhaustion, I think, is like a denial of service would count as that. Either bandwidth or memory or anything else, I think that they're in like the same category. A memory leak, that would be like when you so the goal of a buffer overflow or an integer overflow is to make it leak. And so, like, let's say you wanted a lot of information to be protected in a specific database, and then it wasn't getting saved to the database that it was getting encoded in. That would be the goal of a memory leak. Secure socket layer stripping is when you make communication happen on a less secure channel. driver manipulation. There's driver shimming. Apparently it's when you run your own driver instead of the one that's supposed to be there, or you just change the driver to begin with. Pass the hash is probably pretty straightforward. So a hash is a little bit more complicated than just saying it's an encoded, because it translates into a certain number of characters. And pass the hash means when someone steals the hashed user credentials instead of and uses it to create a new user session on the same network. So I guess they log in with it. 1.4 is pretty easy. We got past the hard part of 1.3. Evil Twin is when you make a copy of a wireless network. A rogue access point is when you don't make a copy of one, you just make one. So I think initialization vector is when you salt a hash, but okay. The difference between an initialization vector and a salt. The salt is put into the plain text before hashing. And the initialization vector I don't know. It's like just in a different step. I just read this forum and it says that it doesn't really make a difference, and this initialization vector is a little basically the same. An on-path attack is a man-in-the-middle attack or a man-in-the-browser. It's when someone else is viewing it that shouldn't be viewing it, or they're playing that game Telephone where they send you a fake version of it. Layer 2 attacks, which, and by layer 2 they mean layer 2 of the OSI model. The layer 2 is specifically the data link layer. that involves moves data in and out of a physical link in a network. It's the in between of the physical and the network. So the address resolution protocol, ARP poisoning is when the attacker gets the information instead of you. MAC flooding is when they tell a computer that there's a bunch of devices that don't exist. MAC cloning is when you make a copy of an approved device. DNS domain hijacking is... I don't know how it's different from a session hijack. So it's a lot different. Domain hijack is when you steal the web address. DNS poisoning. Sorry, I thought we went over that already, but DNS poisoning is different from ARP poisoning. DNS poisoning is when you reroute traffic from one website to a fake website. URL redirection, it's pretty much the same thing, but it is implemented a little different. Domain reputation, that's when you make it seem like a real website as a spam website. Denial of service is when you send a bunch of information to something that it can't handle. Now you can do that to the network. How can you do it to an application? Yeah, it's when you make the application not function. And what's an operational technology? What even is operational technology? An operational technology, DDoS, that's when you screw with the router and the switch. Malicious code or script. PowerShell is the Microsoft. Python is usually in software. Bash is Linux. And macros is from Excel. VBA is used, I don't know what it's used in. Microsoft, I guess. No, I can't tell you much more about those. 1.4, definitely a lot easier than 1.3. 1.5 has a lot of terms, but they're like intuitive. So an advanced persistent threat is something that has a lot of resources. So like usually they mean a country or organized crime. Insider threats is someone who works in the company. A state actor, that's more specific than APT. It's when someone works for the government. Hacktivist is someone who wants a political or social agenda. A script kiddie is someone who copy pastes script. Criminal syndicates, that's hackers. Shadow IT, what is shadow IT? Competitors is obvious, but what's shadow IT? I don't totally get it. It's just stuff that isn't checked on. Stuff you can't trust. IT devices, software, and services outside the ownership or control of IT organizations. I don't know what an example of that is. Now, attributes of actors: internal, they're in the company; external, they're out of the company. What's their level of sophistication? How much money do they have? What are they trying to accomplish? Vectors. How are they accessing your thing? Direct access, like they're physically at the thing. Are they using wireless? Are they phishing through your emails? Are they part of your supply chain? Are they using your social media? Are they using USBs? Are they part of the cloud? Or these are different ways you can affect a thing. Threat intelligence sources. This is where you learn about the threats. Any open sourced intelligence, there's closed intelligence or proprietary. Those are privately owned. Vulnerability databases or databases of vulnerability. Public private information sharing centers, the dark web. I don't know why indicators of compromise is in that. Is it automated indicator sharing? Structured threat information expression. Sticks. Well, that explains why in a Sonic Boom the paranoid character's name is Sticks. Trusted automated exchange of intelligence information, predictive analysis, threat maps, or file and code repositories. Now, these are all plain English. Like, we don't need much explanation. Vendor websites will often want their programs to be up and running. Vulnerability feeds, conferences, academic journals, requests for comments, local industry groups, social media, threat feeds, adversary tactics, techniques, and procedures. Now, this all should be pretty easy. You just have to remember what sticks, taxi, RFC, and TTP mean. Structured threat information expression, trusted automated exchange of intelligence information, request for comments, and adversary tactics, techniques, and procedures. 1.6. Explain the security concerns associated with various types of vulnerabilities. And this is all pretty plain English also. Cloud-based or on-premises vulnerabilities. 0-day is stuff that no one's found out about yet. Weak configurations. Here are some examples. Open permissions, unsecure root accounts, errors, weak encryption, unsecure protocols, default settings, open ports, and services. Now, I think this little section is what you're really hiring someone to know about. Third-party risks, the vendor management, the system integration, lack of vendor support, supply chain, outsourced code development, data storage. If you give it to another person, you can trust them, but it's a risk. Improper or weak patch management. Firmware. Operating system. Applications. Legacy platforms provide a risk. That's why you can't use Flash anymore, because they haven't been maintaining it, so it's a huge risk for everybody. Impacts. Data loss. Data breaches. Data exfiltration. Identity theft. Financial impacts. Reputation impacts, and availability loss. Yep, that's all plain English. 1.6 there. 1.7. Threat hunting. Intelligence fusion. I've never heard of that before. Intelligence fusion is when you integrate threat intelligence across all security aspects of an organization. I'm not clear on what a security aspect is, but I don't know. Threat feeds, advisories and bulletins, maneuvers. Vulnerability scans. A false positive is when you get something that's not actually supposed to be a positive. It's not actually a threat. False negatives are when something passes through your scan. Log reviews are part of it. Credentialed vulnerability scans and non-credentialed vulnerability scans. There's intrusive vulnerability scans and non-intrusive. So, like, is it going to affect the business while you're doing the vulnerability scan? You can scan the application, the web application, the network, and then you need to know about the CVE, the Common Vulnerabilities and Exposures, and the Common Vulnerability Scoring System. The Configuration Review. Syslog, Security Information and Event Management. You get to review reports, you get a packet capture using Wireshark, data inputs, you gotta look at what got inputted, see what the users are doing with user behavior analysis. I'm not clear what a sentiment analysis is. A sentiment analysis is the use of natural language processing, like do they talk the way they're supposed to. Text analysis, computational linguistics, and biometric to identify whether the person is actually who they say they are. Security monitoring is just when you check stuff. Log aggregation is when you get all the logs. Log collectors are specific programs. Security orchestration, automation, and response are systems. And that's SOAR. What a lot of the questions on the test will be asking is what don't these things do? 1.8. Explain the techniques used in penetration testing. So a known environment is an environment where you get information. Where you don't get information is called an unknown environment. A partially known environment is an environment that's partially known. Rules of engagement, you gotta know the rules. Lateral movement is when if you get access to one part, you get access to things also on that level. Privilege escalation is when you get to a higher level. Persistence is checking how hard you need to try. Cleanup is when you get rid of your traces. Bug bounty is when you get paid to find specific bugs in a program. Pivoting. It's kind of like lateral movement. Pivoting versus... Pivoting is the act of moving from host to host instead of on the same machine. Lateral movement is when you gain access to other users and accounts. Pivoting is when you go to another host. Alright, we know what drones are. Warflying is when you go checking for everywhere for open ports and whatnot. War driving is when you check... You check for vulnerabilities, like open hotspots. Footprinting is when you... I don't know. It's when you gather as much data as possible about a specific targeted computer system. OSINT, open source intelligence. Exercise types. The red team are the hackers, the blue team are the defenders, the white team sets the rules of engagement, and the purple team uses both defensive and offensive techniques. Well, that's 1.0 of it. We also have 2.0. Come on. Okay. And 3.0. And 4.0. Is there a 5? Yes, a 5. 5.0.